be considered moral compromises in terms of it being an imperfect real world where it's good to know your ideals, but if you only stand for your ideals, that in of itself can be a kind of problem. You have to decide what kind of compromises you want to make. And we looked at Churchill's famous thing about making a deal with the devil if it meant defeating Hitler, right? You remember those kinds of things. So it occurred to me that that might be a useful way of thinking about the controversy. And what's brought this to mind is today is election day, that about the controversy of what is going on in New York. So I don't know about you guys, or as they say in Pittsburgh, yuns, but about, you know where that comes from. You guys became Ewans, which became yuns. In Pittsburgh, it's a unique thing
In New
about.
York, it would have been used guys.
Well, in Lewis also. In St. Louis, we say use guys too.
Now it's used.
It pains me to find any commonality between St. Louis and New York, but there is one. You guys, I don't know if you have been embroiled with the nonstop emails and the like regarding the election in New York City.
Yes.
Yes.
So particularly, whether you are a current or former rabbi, however you want to think about our earlier conversation, you've been getting emails and materials about this famous letter that was written in New York that essentially was trying to influence the election in terms of the Jewish community away from Mamdani towards an alternative. You know what I'm talking about? Are you familiar with this? That over 1,000 rabbis have signed this letter.
I didn't know that.
So I got a kind of a conversation, a thread between, I think is the term that is used today, of a WhatsApp conversation with our youngest son, who is obsessed with politics. And he works for the URJ. He's the lead organizer. He runs RAC Illinois, which is the Religious Action Center Illinois, just like there's a RAC Pennsylvania and a RAC Florida, who was very opposed to that letter. But he's a very strong Israel advocate in terms of liberal Zionism, as I've defined it. But he was very upset at this letter. Okay, so we had a back and forth. I don't need to bore you with the details of that. But it's useful, I think, to figure out a way to conceptualize these kinds of things. Come to a way of thinking about these kinds of things. So it occurred to me that the material we looked at last week is relevant to this. Because what's going on in New York as a complete outsider, I know we have at least one New Yorker here.
I haven't lived in New York for 50 years.
I know, but once,
What's it like?
yeah, you can take the girl out of New York. But, yeah, okay. But, and so you should know this. I visit New York infrequently and reluctantly. But, and we fly through New York. We'll be through Kennedy in a couple of weeks, if that counts. But, so I'm completely an outsider. I want to make that clear. But this election has attracted attention as if it were a national election, particularly in the Jewish community. Okay, so here's the way I see it. Remember last time I said that the concern many people want to bifurcate the discussion, the world, into this is right and this is wrong. This is good, this is bad. If you are on the bad side, then whoever is on the other side must be the good side. If you are on the wrong side, whoever is on the other side must be the right side. And I specifically, because I thought it would be important for us to think of this way, I tried to talk about this in terms of younger people and the way the discussion goes. And my comment was, the world actually doesn't work that way. It's not bifurcated between good and bad, right and wrong. Often it's between bad and worse, or worse and worst. That's what your choices are. And it seems to me that's what's going on in this election in New York. Strictly from a Jewish point of view, as an outsider who's looking at this through Jewish eyes, American Jewish eyes, you have the choice between somebody who is not only negative about Israel, but is out there negative about Israel, who on October 8th lauded Hamas. That's one side. On the other side is not good. The other side is a rapist. Certainly a sexual abuser.
Yeah.
In the form of the former governor. So which is the bad and which is the worse? And I believe that that's what the real discussion is going on in the Jewish community, if not in the wider community. Who are we supposed to vote for? If you're a New Yorker, who are you supposed to vote for? Which one is the less bad? And I think it's a case in point of exactly what we were talking about last week, which is why this is so controversial, because you can make the case in either direction, depending on your order of priority. Which priority takes precedence?
Or which one do you look at first?
Well,
They go to the other one.
Well, yeah, I mean, all of the publicity is about Mamdani and what he has said vis-a-vis Israel and the fears of the Jewish community regarding what that's going to mean for them down the line. But it's just not getting the same level of publicity. But there are a lot of concerns about Cuomo and his past behavior and what that will mean if he is a mayor of New York. And how do you balance this?
Well, both of them have tried to clean up their act.
Only minimally. Only when I say that minimally, I mean only in terms of public relations.
What they really are like in here, who knows? But verbally, they've been on many programs that I've watched, and they're both trying to clean up their act.
So it's regardless, the outcome this evening is not going to be good versus bad, at least not in my view. And I think it's a case in point, a genuine case in point of what we were talking about last week. Okay, let's move on to another variation of this theme, which is mostly going to be about means and ends. And the classic way that this gets discussed is the ends justify the means. Hopefully we're going to come to a little bit of a different perspective on this by the time we finish. We'll see. All right. But I think it's an important discussion, particularly after the last 2 years, where another piece of the whole discussion regarding, and I'm looking at this from a lens as somebody who, as the two of us have spent most of our time in Israel, particularly during the last 2 years, is the question of ends is not often the real discussion, but means is the real discussion. And so to ignore this question is to make a mistake. I also think, and this comes out of my rabbinic background, that it's always helpful if we can look at traditional texts to help us get into the subject of whatever is irritating or holding us at the moment, right? So this is going to maybe be a little weird, at least in the beginning, right? Everybody is warned. Okay, so let's look at Genesis 1:11. Everybody sees this? So it's page 1 in your book, in what I've copied for you. Oh, by the way, I should tell you the person who put this all together is Dr. Tal Becker. So Tal Becker, who has been a vice president of the Hartman Institute for a long time now, I don't know, 10, 15 years, But only recently, this has become his whole job, is to be vice president, and they've expanded his role. Before that, his real job, his full-time job, was as one of the official negotiators for the state of Israel with the Palestinians. This is a guy with a PhD, but he's really a lawyer. That's his background. And so he regularly used to say to us, you can quote the things that I say in the lesson, but you can't attribute it to me. Meaning by that is that he knew things that you could only know if you were inside the room when you were in these negotiations. And this is over the course of decades. He had been negotiator for it. And so, would you like one of these? Is that what that look on your face
Yeah,
meant?
my tradition.
Can you give it to?
Can you have one more?
Sure. It's good to know, Betty, that some things do not change. Richard comes in 2 or 3 minutes after Nancy, and you come in a few minutes after the, okay. So Tal no longer is in that role for the government. So he no longer has to say the things that he used to say, trying to be careful. And he no longer is 100% current on what is being said like he was. He's no longer in the room. But he has a lot of experience and a lot of background. So when he says things like, Israel has devastated the capacity of its enemies, meaning in the last 2 years, in return for devastating its story in the West. That's 100% accurate. As soon as you hear it, you know that's accurate. And he says it coming out of the background that I just described to you. Okay, and he's now going to talk about means and ends. Okay. All right, so he wanted us to see this verse. This is from the creation story, right? Genesis 1:11. It's a little past the most famous part, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz, when God began to create, or in the beginning, depending on which one of the translations you like, God created the heaven and the earth, right? We heard that on Simchat Torah. We heard it the next Shabbat on, I don't know what was read here, but probably that's what was read, the 6 days of creation. But here in verse 11, a little further into the story, you have Vayomer Elohim. God says, Tadshe haaretz deshe. Let the earth, it's translated here, sprout vegetation, which means, okay, green stuff start to grow. Green stuff start to grow. Esev mazria zera. Little hard to translate this into English. It's okay here the way it is. Seed-bearing plants. A plant that produces seeds. Okay? Eitz pri. Fruit trees. Eitz. Right? It is a tree of life. Eitz pri. Bere pri hagafen. Brings forth the fruit of the vine, right? Fruit tree. Osei pri limino. The fruit tree will make fruit after its kind, right? Asher zaru bo al haaretz. Every kind on the earth that bear fruit with the seed in it. You can see even the English feels a little weird, and that's because the Hebrew feels that same kind of weirdness. And it was so. Okay, that's what happens. The earth brought forth vegetation, seed-bearing plants of every kind and trees of every kind, bearing fruit with the seed in it, and God saw this was good, right? So God says, okay, fruit-bearing trees start producing. And there are fruit-bearing trees, and they start to produce, and it's good. Okay, so far? Mm-hmm. We all know who Rashi is? Mm-hmm. Who's Rashi? He's the commentator. He's the commentary, 12th century France. You start with him. When you talk about the first commentators on the Bible, more important even in the Talmud, He is it. And then you go from him. Okay? So Rashi, even when he says things that aren't so interesting or even dumb, you still pay attention to it. Right? You still pay attention because it's Rashi. Okay. So what does Rashi have to say about this little verse? Rashi says, we're going to talk about Eitz Pri. Fruit tree. Tree of fruit. Okay. So I'm just going to read the English. That the taste of the tree be exactly the same as that of the fruit. In other words, what God issues is he says, fruit trees, you're going to produce fruit. But what it said upstairs is, in the verse above, fruit trees of every kind on the earth with the seed in it. And it was so. Creating for him the impression that the tree itself tasted like the fruit. Now, this is very weird for us, right?
Yeah.
We do not think that the wood of a lemon tree will taste like a lemon. However, Rashi is telling us that originally God's plan was that the wood of a lemon tree would taste like a lemon. Okay. The taste of the tree be exactly the same as the taste of the fruit. It did not, however, do this. Instead, in verse 12, it says the earth brought forth a tree yielding fruit. And the tree itself was not a fruit. Therefore, when Adam was cursed on account of his sin, the earth was also visited because of its sin and was cursed also. Now that last part is not, I'm not interested in Adam's sin. What I'm interested in is apparently the tree decided God had it wrong. No, I'm going to produce fruit. And the fruit will taste the way it's supposed to. Not me. I'm the tree, not the fruit. The fruit will be what tastes. Do we see this here? It's as if the tree is saying to God, you forgot about the process. The correct process is, I'm the tree, I produce fruit, people eat the fruit. Not, no process, just, you want the taste of a lemon, eat the tree, eat the fruit, eat what, it doesn't matter, it's all the same. Which seemed to be God's point. There would be no process, no step by step. And the tree, no, there will be a process.
But except that it says, okay, going back to Genesis, that the earth sprout vegetation, seed-bearing plants, fruit trees. By saying seed-bearing, doesn't that indicate that the fruit is what we're talking about?
No, it indicates that there's fruit.
Yes.
All right, but
the seed, for the reproductive part of it, is in the
So-
fruit,
you are arguing that Rashi did not understand the verse correct.
right? And he's not here to argue with me.
Fine.
Okay.
However, irrelevant. What matters is what I think is relevant is how Rashi understood the verse. Okay, and so what Rashi is saying, V'hilo astaken, the tree did not do what God said. Ela totzi haaretz eitz. The land gave forth a tree, osepri, who made fruit. The tree said the correct process is, I will be the tree, I will make fruit, people will pick the fruit. Okay, in other words, there's a process. There is a means. And the means matters. Because does God rebuke the tree? Does God say, no, that's not what I said was going to happen. You do it my way, I'm God. That's not what happened. God is fine with the way trees do it. Understanding, I showed this last week in a different kind of context, that you can find texts where the text seems to change the course of whatever it is that God said. Remember, Moses was supposed to decimate this people and instead sends messengers, and God says, Oh, that's okay. I like that. Yeah. Let's do it your way, Moses. Okay, so here the tree is saying to God, no. There's a correct means here. And God says, okay. Now, if you think about this for a minute, if God is God, God would not be interested in means. If God wants something to happen, it happens. God speaks according to Genesis, and it's there. There's no question of how do we get to point B from point A. For God, point A, point B, C, it's all the same. If you're God.
That's similar to free will. I mean, a tree wouldn't necessarily have will, but
Well, in this case, it does.
so is that similar, like God's allowing people or whoever to have the free
Well,
will?
what it is God is recognizing, yeah, I wouldn't know anything about that. That's not within the godly experience. But none of the rest of creation is God. And so we have right at the beginning of Genesis a kind of argument that means matter, even if they don't matter to God because God is God. So I know that's sort of weird, but do we all sort of see that? You look like you're in pain.
No, it's a hard concept.
Maybe constipated, but something. Okay, all right. So let's look at number 3 now. Rabbi Hanina Bar Papa expounded, now we're in the Talmud, Babylonian Talmud. At the moment when the Holy One said regarding the tree after its kind, the types of herbage raised a kal v'chomer regarding themselves. Do we know what a kal v'chomer is? So the people who have been studying Talmud, they know what a kal v'chomer is. This will help you. It's an argument a fortiori. Okay, so these are principles of reasoning. The rabbis developed principles of reasoning by which they could expand and expound the text. So one of their favorites is called kal v'chomer, which means light to heavy, roughly. Which means if something is true in a light case, if we can prove that something is true in a relatively unimportant case, how much the more so is that same thing going to be true in an important case? That makes sense to everybody? So what Hanina Bar Papa is saying, this business with trees, let's put a kal v'chomer on it. Let's see where that leads. Regarding themselves, reason if the Holy One desires confusion of the species, why did God say each after its own kind? And furthermore, a kal v'chomer, if even regarding trees, which are not of the manner to emerge in confusion, the Holy One said each after its kind, for us, how much the more so? Immediately, each and every type emerged after its kind. In other words, if God was concerned that trees, that you get another lemon tree from a lemon tree, then how much the more so is that going to be true with everything else? That everything follows a kind of pattern. Everything follows a kind of logic, but following that logic matters. Now we're going to look at another Genesis. This is a very important passage in my view. I brought it up last week. If any of you can remember way back when you took classes with me, you will remember that I tended to bring this up frequently. Every teacher has favorite passages that are the touchstones of the things that teacher, in my case, that rabbi teaches. I had a teacher when I was down the road in Cincinnati in rabbinic school, said every rabbi really only has 3 or 4 sermons. They give it in 150 different ways, but it's really 3 or 4 sermons. In other words, everybody has 3 or 4 things which are the things that really matter to them in terms of how they think, how they organize their thoughts, and the like. I don't think this is just rabbis, I think this is true for all teachers. I think this is particularly true for pretty much everybody, that there are certain things that we come back to. So for me, there's certain biblical stories. So this is the story of Abraham. Okay? And God starts the story, this is chapter 18, starts the story by saying, shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? What is God about to do? God says, should I not tell my pal Abraham that I'm going to destroy Sodom? And God concludes, oh no, Abraham is supposed to become a great and populous nation. How does God know that? God told him, right. And all the nations of the earth are going to be blessed through him. Now I don't know about you, have you ever wondered what that means? That everybody's going to be blessed through Abraham and his seed, through the Jewish people. What does that mean? Blessed by us. Okay. God says, for I have singled him out. This is the meaning of the blessing. I have singled him out that he may instruct his children and his posterity to keep the way of the Lord. And this is important because the Hebrew is V'shamu derech Adonai, to keep the path of the Lord, to keep the way of the Lord. What does that mean? What does it mean to do God's path? By doing what is just and right, in order that the Lord may bring about for Abraham what God has promised him. Okay, so what was this promise that God made to Abraham? You are going to be a great nation, and all the nations of the earth are going to be blessed through you. And how are they going to be blessed? Because you will instruct your family, ultimately your tribes, your people, in God's ways. What are God's ways? Justice and right, and thereby the world will be instructed in this. Big time burden, this blessing. Right? This is entirely a passage about means. Abraham, you're going to be the vector. You're going to be the means to the development, the moral development of humanity. A very big job. Very, very big job. Okay. And God said, if we skip down, Abram said, remember we didn't need to reproduce everything in there. You remember Abraham goes to God and says to God, what? Oh, you're going to wipe out Sodom and Gomorrah? But what if there are 50 righteous people? It starts with 50. 50 righteous people. Then what does Abram say to God? Can the judge of the whole earth not judge righteously? Think about it. God has made Abraham the vector of morality. And Abraham turns to God and says, oh no, this is not moral. You can't wipe out the good with the bad. Imagine that. Does God get angry? No. God simply says, okay, I won't wipe it out if there are 50. Does Abraham quit? 45. Does Abraham quit? 40, 30, 20, 10. Then the story ends. Were there 10? There was one family. His nephew. Lot's wife, who sadly does not have a name. She's just Lot's wife. Maybe they should have called her Salty or something. Anyway, they get to leave. They get to leave. Then there's more to the story. spend a whole hour talking about Lot's wife and why she looked back. Should she have looked back? What was Lot doing? All that. But that's another story for another time. Right, and his daughters, who sort of behave a little badly with Lot a little later.
Well, after he hopes to give them to the crowd to be raped.
True.
That's
They were-
actually.
True, that's a, no,
No, it's in the
no, it's in the Bible, but they repopulate
Well, they think
with
they're
a
the
little bit
last-
of, they think they're the last people on earth, so what's a little incest? Anyway. That's another story for another time, okay? Another story for another time. But look at this. Abraham says to God, what matters here? The ends or the means? The means matter. We have to check this place out. You can't just willy-nilly go destroying it because they're wicked. Nobody is disputing that Sodom is wicked. Abraham's not disputing that Sodom is wicked. Abraham is saying that there might be righteous people there also. So we have to check it out. We have to look into this. We have to undergo the correct process. We can't just willy-nilly go in and destroy the place. Somewhat relevant now? This is biblical all the way back into the deep recesses of Genesis. In my view, this is the Abraham that we admire. Anybody want to say something? I've been talking a lot. I just want to check to make sure that someone doesn't have a question, a comment, a point of view. Wow, stunned into silence. All right. And you see this again, just in case you, in Genesis 17, you get the same kind of thing. Who is Abram? He's not Abraham yet. Who's Abram? Avram. He's 90 years old, 99 years old. Vayira Adonai el Avram, God appeared to him. Vayomer elav, God said to him, Ani El Shaddai. Probably another name in that area for a god, El Shaddai. We translate it as God Most High. Shaddai comes from the word shad. Shad is breast. So many interesting midrashim on that, particularly if you're into feminist midrash and theology. But it probably meant at the time some sort of mountain or hill. What? Yeah, like the Grand Tetons. What are the Grand Tetons? You should be able to hear it now. Okay. It's the same thing. And so God Most High says to him, to Abraham, what is your job? Titalech lefanai ve'yeh tamim. Walk before me and be blameless. Notice again, movement, walk, means you should go through life trying to be blameless. Now, I believe that these are goals. This is like the other side of what we were talking about last week. In terms of we talked about last week, what are the compromises you make? Now it's like, what are our values? What are our goals? Okay, we ready to look at Babylonian Talmud? This is one of my favorite passages. Again, one of the ones I quote all the time. It's as if Tal was channeling the things that all the famous passages that I already know. I actually taught this on Yom Kippur morning in Beckley this year. So what does it mean to walk in God's ways? Does any of us here have a clear, as Descartes would have said, a clear and distinct idea of what it means to walk in God's ways? Well, the rabbis have a very clear idea. It's here in a tractate of the Talmud called Sota, which is sort of funny that it's in Sota. Sota means a woman accused of adultery. And there's a whole thing in the book of Numbers about what happens with her. But in that tractate, where they're talking about adulterous women, the Talmud never stays on topic. They also come up with this. So Rabbi Chama, who is the son of Rabbi Hanina, don't get confused, said, what is meant by that which is written, you shall walk after the Lord your God? What does it mean to walk in God's ways? Is it possible for a person to follow the divine presence? Is it really possible that a human being can follow after God? That a human being can behave like God? Is that possible? We finite entities, God being God, God who doesn't see ends and means, right? It's all the same to God. But we human beings, we're not like that. So what does it mean when the text tells us, walk in God's ways, follow God's ways, walk after God? And then just to throw a little monkey wrench into this, is it possible that a person who follows the divine presence, isn't it already written? For the Lord your God is a devouring fire. What happens when you get too close to God? What happened to Nadav and Abihu? Remember them? Nadav and Abihu, Aaron's sons, who try to get close to God. On the altar, they offer Eish Zara, strange fire, whatever that means. And what happened to them? Literally, they are zapped. A fire comes from heaven and consumes them. And later in the text, it says that the others carried them off of the altar by their tunics, which meant they were burned from the inside out. Right? Otherwise, their tunics wouldn't be there. So, getting close to God is very dangerous. Indeed, any kind of holiness is dangerous. So what is the Holy of Holies? You've all heard this phrase, right?
Yeah.
Kodesh Kodeshim. What is the Holy of Holies? It is the one place on the Temple Mount in in the temple where only the high priest, only on Yom Kippur, entered. Why? It's dangerous. It's dangerous. Like they remember the old commercials, you don't must mess with Mother Nature. Do you remember this commercial? Well, remember that? You mess with Mother Nature, and there was a lightning bolt that came. You don't mess with the divine. You don't mess with holiness. And so this text is saying we're supposed to follow after God, but if we get too close, look what happened to Nadav and Abihu. I mean, no thanks. How are we supposed to do this? All right, so the answer is, watch how clever this is, I think.
The background music's good.
Did somebody plan that? We get angelic harp playing right when I said. You couldn't plan these things. One day I was leading services at Emmanuel in Chicago, and we had a very wonky sound system. They're always wonky, every one of these synagogue sounds, but it was really wonky in Emmanuel. And there was a guy, his first name was Al, and he came every Saturday morning. He walked with two canes. He would slowly come in and sit in the front. He had hearing aids in each ear. And he would spend the entire service adjusting them with his fingers going like this. So I'm up front trying to lead services, and there's this really sweet old guy sitting in the front row going, because the sound system kept changing a little bit, and so he's trying. Remember the old hearing aids, even the new ones, but the old one.
The days of apps.
Right, so I'm sitting there watching him do this, and we had a problem that the microphones would feed back. And so what I had learned is what a feedback loop is? You've all heard this. It's where the microphone is too loud, it produces too much for the system, which bounces off the walls and comes back and hits the microphone again, which makes it even more so, and it keeps bouncing. So I learned to break the feedback loop, put your hand on the microphone, on the top, cover it, and move it away from you a little bit. So that's what I did. Moved it away from me, but I moved it right towards Alan
Oh,
and his hearing aids.
oh dear.
So I'm reading from the Torah, and I said, Vayomer Adonai el Moshe, and God said to Moses, and all of a sudden I got, it was his hearing aids creating this feedback loop. You're gonna have your whole career and never have a story. I have 10 of, all right, anyway.
More than
More than that. So,
The other technology, we might have more of them.
okay, so this is the same kind of thing. I just said that in his phone, but that's what caused me to think about it. Okay, so God walked after attributes of the naked, and the Lord made Adam and his wife leather tunics and clothed them. So how do we follow after God? We clothe the naked. Just like God did. God made clothes for Adam and Eve. We want to walk in God's ways. Imitatio Dei. We imitate God. We clothe the naked. Next. God visited the sick. How do we know God visited the sick? And God appeared to Abraham at Elonei Mamre. What was Abraham doing at Elonei Mamre?
circumcising everybody.
And himself.
Yeah.
Abraham at 99 circumcised himself. He circumcised Ishmael, 13. Isaac, fortunately for us, was 8 days old. No, for us, because that became our pattern. It's all about us here. But Abraham is in his tent. What is he doing in his tent at Elonei Mamre, at the terebinths of Mamre, at the trees of Mamre? He's recovering. 99, circumcised himself with a flint. Stone.
I have to leave.
Yeah, it takes, you won't remember this from Saturday Night Live. Remember the guy doing a mohel doing a circumcision in the back of a limousine? This was all based on the diamond cutting commercials that were prevalent at the time. Anyway.
It's like your side.
So Abraham is sick. He's recovering, and God went to visit him. So you should go visit the sick. God comforted the mourners. How do we know God did that? And it was after Abraham's death, and God blessed Isaac, his son. God went to visit Isaac after his father Abraham died. God was comforting Isaac, the mourner. So far, how do you imitate God? How do you walk in God's ways? You clothe the naked, visit the sick, comfort the mourners. And God buried the dead. How do we know that? And God buried Moses in the valley. How do we know it was God who buried Moses in the valley? Moses goes off by himself to die, and it says that no man knows where Moses' grave is. So who buried him? It says he had a grave. By process of elimination, it has to be God. Just as God buried Moses, it's our obligation to bury the dead. Now, I don't think that this is an exhaustive list, but it's a very suggestive list. Look at that. If you think about it, how are we human beings? Remember, we're supposed to teach the world. How are we supposed to teach the world about walking in God's ways? You do the basic things that connect human beings together. You see somebody without clothes, clothe them naked. You see somebody who's sick, you try to help them. Somebody who needs to be buried, you bury him. I think it's a remarkable passage. People often ask, well, what's the essence of walking in God? In the Christian community, there's certain parts of the Christian community, there's this thing about what would Jesus do? And that's it. Okay, so this is our version of that. Yes.
That almost sounds like he went to bless Isaac, his son, went to visit him. It was kind of the first Shiva.
It's not kind of. According to this passage, it is. That's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is. This is the meaning of the Hebrew word chesed. You all know the word chesed? You've heard this Hebrew word chesed, which is very difficult to translate. So the accepted translation is loving kindness. When you get a translation like this, you know that there's not a good single word here. It sort of means love. It sort of means kindness. It sort of has to do. So we confuse this in the modern Jewish world, in my view, particularly in the Reform movement. We are very, very concerned with tikkun olam, right? If you corner a Reform Jew who may not be very observant, may not attend very much, and you challenge that person and say, well, what makes you Jewish? What do you do? If they know the phrase, they'll say, well, I care about tikkun olam. I want to challenge that. Because I think most of the time what they mean is that they try to do acts of chesed. Like they give charity. Like they'll go to a shiva. That they'll visit the dead. Tikkun olam is something different. Tikkun olam is when you try to take steps that correct the world. Not the same thing. So, that we're involved because of our youngest son. When RAC Ohio calls on Temple Israel about a tikkun issue, tikkun olam issue, it's not talking about a chesed issue. It's not talking about making sandwiches for whoever you're making sandwiches for now. Daybreak. As important as that is, it's very important. You can see right here, it's of critical importance, but it's not tikkun olam. Tikkun olam would be working to change society so you don't need to make the sandwich. Right? You need both. That's really what Reform Judaism should be about. Yes, chesed. First of all, it should also be about the calendar, and it should be about Hebrew, and it should be about Jewish education, and in my view, it should be about the state of Israel and modern Jewish life across the world, and it should also be about chesed, and it should be about tikkun olam. But sadly, we've managed to teach two words in Hebrew, tikkun olam, and it's become the catch-all for everything, which makes it meaningless. When something means everything, it means nothing. We don't like to say this. I mean, I can say these kind of things now. We don't like to say this because it's you aren't going to get that kind of statement coming out of New York, out of the URJ. But it is really important to understand these things and why each of them are important. But here, we are being told specifically the means that matter. You notice there were no ends here. Does the person stop being dead? Does it say that the sick person recovers? Does it? The naked person hopefully has some clothes, which is a difference. But this is not about ends. This whole passage is about means. It is the means that matter. You can't really. Is anybody here going to achieve world peace? If you are, please raise your hand. No, seriously. I mean, yeah, we can listen to John Lennon's song. Imagine. By the way, that utopia scares the hell out of me. If you actually look at the lyrics, where there'll be no differences between anybody, everybody will be the same. What a boring, terrible place that would be. Really, I have no use for this song at all, but it is his most important, biggest song. It's a touchstone of a kind of utopia that exists certainly in the English-speaking Western world. Since I think it was 50 years old recently, something like that was. But I'm not suggesting that. What I'm suggesting is that we can't control the ends, but we can control the means. What we do. Anybody want to say anything else about this passage? Because I think it's really an important passage. If you walk out with nothing else other than this, okay. All right. Now we're going to go into something weird again.
I have a quick question. I'm thinking about you know, Christianity, the difference is, I think they are trying to do good and, you know, make the world better.
No,
But there
doubt,
is some
no doubt.
sort of, they're looking to have, you know, rewards of heaven. And that's
Well, we have that too, but that's another class for another class.
okay, but so, so is that, I was just curious if that's a
Yeah,
different.
so I can give you my short answer. It's just for me. Judaism has all sorts of stuff about the world to come and about how things get balanced and life after death and all sorts of things. I wrote my rabbinic thesis on this. One year, I think I did 4 sessions on this or 2 or 3 sessions on it. I don't remember. But people say to me, is that really at the heart of Judaism? At the heart of Judaism is observing the mitzvot, which is another way of saying focusing on the means. Observing the mitzvot. And my take on it is we are obligated, based on what we've read here, I'm not going to review it again about what God has told Abraham, what our role in life is that our job is to do the mitzvot. If it turns out something good happens after we die because of that, great. If it turns out nothing happens after we die, we were still supposed to observe the mitzvot because that's who we are. And so that's all that matters. If you want to believe something's going to happen, if you want to be agnostic about something's going to happen, if you want to be convinced nothing is going to happen, all okay with me. I think also with the tradition, but definitely with me. I can speak for myself. But what matters is the means, what we are doing now in terms of the mitzvah. Okay, so let's look at this next level of weirdness. Okay, Rashi 27. This is after the Akedah. We all remember the Akedah? Heard it? Did you read the Akedah this year, last week?
I was not at school this last week. Everybody?
I didn't mean to catch you up on that.
I'm like, I don't know what we read last Friday night. I was busy
You read
engaging
something
in
else?
a highly.
Often I did
Jewish
not read
stuff.
this when we came to it because we had just read it on Rosh Hashanah. So I read something else from the Torah portion, but okay. So here's Rashi. Isaac is tied onto the altar. V'haya aviv rotzeh lishchoto. And his father wanted to slaughter him. Is what? Wanted.
Yeah.
This is Rashi, not Genesis. This is Rashi's take on Genesis. Rashi says Abraham wanted to slaughter him. I believe, by the way, Rashi is correct here. This is not Abraham of Sodom, who was only concerned about means. Now God has given Abraham an order. Sacrifice your son. And what does Abraham do? When and how? In other words, that's the end. God tells me what to do, the goal, I'm doing it. No questions asked. Which means God told him to sacrifice his son, I want to sacrifice him. I know it's disturbing, but that is the story. Rashi's got it right. But Otasha'ah, at the same time, Niftechu Hashamayim, the skies, the heavens opened. V'ra'u Malachei Hasharet. Who are the Malachei Hasharet? Shalom Aleichem Malachei Hasharet. Right, you all know this? Who are the angels of service? They look down. V'hayu bochim. Just for you, Meredith. They start crying. They see Abraham is chomping at the bit to kill his son. And the angels look down and they start crying. V'yardu dim'otehem, and their tears fell. V'naflu al einav, and they fell on Isaac's eyes. The angel's tears. The fikach kahu einav. That's why Isaac couldn't see well. Think about this for a moment. And we have to, it didn't occur to me until Tal said this. That's why I love taking these lectures with these guys, because they always say something that probably in a zillion years would not occur to me. And then it's like, of course, why didn't I think of that? His eyes were weak, remember? Because the angels start crying when they see his father was going to kill him. Isaac was not seen. Therefore, he can't see. That's sinking in.
That's right.
I learned this the hard way, really. I'm really being honest here. In the rabbinate, the most important thing people want is to be seen. They go through, you go through, I go through, jump through amazing hoops to get people to see it. Half of the irritations in the rabbinate, you know what the irritations are, people who come into the office complaining about this, that, or the other. Any of you, and there are people here who have been present in the congregation, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Almost always, not always, but almost always, you can boil down the complaint to, I was not seen. The text here is telling us Isaac, Yitzchak, was not seen by his father. His father is only hearing God's voice. He is completely filled, completely consumed by God's command to find Mount Moriah and sacrifice his son. He's not even seeing his son anymore, who's walking right there next to him. His son has become merely a means to the end that Abraham is after. This is what happens when the means become not even secondary to the ends. You're willing to sacrifice your son. I told you it was a little weird. It's a pretty amazing passage, don't you think? If you look at it the way Rashi looked at it. Now, granted, Rashi didn't say everything I just said. I'm expanding on the idea that the tears fall on Isaac's eyes. He can't see. The move I'm making, the Talmud, is he can't see because he wasn't seen. He became irrelevant.
Rabbi, I think I asked you last time that Christians believe because Isaac was not killed, this was like a prelude to the coming of Jesus.
Well, they do
He
think
was
that.
killed and he became God.
Well, they do think this. So Isaac, it depends on what kind of Christianity you're talking about. Almost all Christian scholars understand that most of the things about Jesus, there are precursors in the Hebrew Bible. Whether the things that happened to Isaac or things that happened with Elijah and Elisha in particular later on. But
Moses also.
Moses too, but Jewish tradition understands it the same way. There's plenty of Jewish tradition that says Isaac died for our sins, or nearly died for our sins, depending on which version you read. And if you doubt me, just go take a look in the High Holiday Prayer Book again, where it says over and over again, if you don't want to forgive us, God, for ourselves, forgive us for Isaac, who was willing to sacrifice himself. It's right there, black and white in 2 languages. Although in the new prayer book, it may be in multicolors. I don't know. Right? I mean, this is also part of Jewish tradition. We like to draw hard and fast lines between what Christians say and Jews say. Almost always it's wrong. Almost always.
But what if you don't want somebody to die for your sins?
Well, you mean like all of us?
Are you there?
Yeah, no, the point is the idea. The idea, which is, I don't think that's what Rashi is saying here. Rashi is trying to get us to understand what was happening to Isaac. In medieval Europe, they want to understand that Isaac did die for us. And therefore, we are redeemed also. Think what it was like to be a Jew in medieval Europe, surrounded by the Catholic Church and Christian. Okay, we okay so far?
Because see, wasn't that also children from seeing what his father was about to do?
Yeah, for sure. Let's look at the next Genesis back. Because the weirdness goes on a little further. And Abraham said to Sarah, your maid is in your hands, deal with her as you think right. So Sarai treated her harshly, she ran away from her. A messenger of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, the spring on the road to Shur, and said, Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going? That's sort of interesting. Again, we're getting this whole thing about going, process, being on the road. And she said, I am running away from Sarai. And the messenger of the Lord said to her, go back, submit to her harsh treatment. And the messenger of the Lord said to her, I will greatly increase your offspring, and they shall be too many to count. And the messenger of the Lord said to her, further, behold, you are pregnant and shall bear a son. You shall call him Ishmael, for the Lord has paid heed to your suffering. And he shall be a wild person, his hand against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and he shall dwell alongside all of his kin. And she called Adonai, who spoke to her, you are El Roi. No, this is not El Shaddai, God of the mountain. This is El, God. What is Roi? Who sees. We've been on this theme of seeing, by which she meant, have I not gone on seeing after my being seen? Therefore, the well was called Be'er La Haroi. It is between Kadesh and Beer. Hagar bore a son to Abram, and Abram gave the son that Hagar bore him the name Ishmael. Okay, so where does all this happen? At a well called God Sees. And it means that Hagar was eventually seen. Abraham didn't really see her either. Sarai, his wife, is beating up on her. This trouble. I guess that's what it would be called today. Something like that. So she runs away. God says, no, go back. Go back. Because only if you go back are you going to bury Ishmael. And from Ishmael, you're going to have a whole people. Right? Who comes from Ishmael? The Ishmaelites.
So she is a means.
Well, God is saying to her, you have importance.
She said no.
Yeah, she is seen. And I don't think it's an accident happens at a place called God Sees. God is seen. How Roi is something like, let it be seen.
But it's also sending her back to being mistreated.
Yeah. Are you going to fixate on that?
No.
Except that, yeah, she's going back to be mistreated, but she's also going to give birth to the son, which is going to give her.
I know, but it's
Position.
Well, you remember, she's right, because ultimately
Oh,
she
yeah.
runs away with
Yeah,
Ishmael
yes.
also.
Right,
It's
yeah.
not like Sarai approves.
Yeah.
No.
It's but it's yeah, it's a complicated story.
Exactly. These stories are written in, a couple hundred words, but they're always very, very complex. Okay, so Vayitzak, look at Genesis 24. We're skipping ahead now from chapter 16 to 24. This is after Sarai dies. Vayitzak ba, vivo be'er lachai roi. Where is Yitzchak? He's at the well of God seeing. Think this is an accident? This poor guy who can't see, who's never been seen, he's hanging out at the well of God who sees. Because he wants to be seen. He's there. Where isn't he? Where his mother is, dying. He has to come from the well of seeing because his mother has died. Vahu Yoshev Be'eretz HaNegev. He's in the Negev. Not where his mother is.
Where's father?
Not where his father is. Why? Because he was never seen. So again, let's look at Rashi. He had just come from the well of the Chairoi. Now, Rashi wants to tell us why he was there. I suggested he was there hanging out there because that's where he felt a little comfort. But Rashi's got a bigger idea. Why had he gone there? To find Hagar. Hagar, Abraham's concubine. What word do we want to use for her? His first wife.
Handmaid.
When I'm feeling particularly perverse, I introduce Simone as my first wife. Completely true. Completely true. Okay? But he wants to find Hagar because we know Abraham is going to marry again after Sarah dies. What was her name? Keturah, which means sort of something like crown. But Rashi thinks Keturah is Hagar. And so Rashi has Isaac going to the well of seeing, which is where Hagar lives, to get her to come back to Abraham to be seen. To be Abraham's wife now. To be acknowledged. I told you it was weird. What do we think about that? What I see happening here is a repeat over and over again about the importance of means, the importance of being seen, the importance of process, not the importance of ends. We tend, in our debates, in our discussions, to talk about ends. Okay, Genesis 24. Continuing what was up above. I'm at the bottom of page 4. And Abraham breathed his last, dying at a good ripe age, old and contented. And he was gathered to his kin. His sons, Isaac and Ishmael, buried him in the cave in the Machpelah, in the field of Ephron, son of Zohar, the Hittite, facing Mamre, the field that Abraham had bought from the Hittites. There Abraham was buried, and Sarah his wife, it really should be with Sarah his wife. After the death of Abraham, God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac settled at Be'er Lahai. Finally, Isaac feels he is being seen, and that's where he's going to settle. After his parents are both gone. He's the man now.
Where Hagar probably is.
Probably. And you see in Genesis Rabbah, this is the big book of Midrash on Genesis. Her name was Keturah. That's who Abraham marries. Rav says this is Hagar. Nehemiah said to him, but it's not written that Abraham took another. And he said to him, that means only that he married her on the basis of a divine command, just as it says, the Lord continued speaking to me again, saying. The technicality of this is if he really married her, it should say he took her. That's a technical thing. It doesn't say that, so he didn't really marry her. No, he did marry her. He just married her because God told him to. It doesn't matter. What matters is, according to this, Keturah is Hagar. She is finally being seen. Finally being seen. Okay. All right. I'm trying to think. We're running way over time here. So if you look on page 6, everything here. Page 6, these are medieval commentators. Nisim ben Ruvain of Burundi. So where's Burundi? Spain. Italy. Okay? Since the interpretation of the Torah is in their jurisdiction, their intellects understood that it is impure, it is inappropriate that it be deemed tameh, even though this is the opposite of truth, because this is what their intellect dictated. The other view, even though it is true, should not be followed in matters of Torah, just as they did not follow the view of Rabbi Eliezer, despite the bad kol that halacha follows him. So this is very hard to understand without the background. But I wanted to get to the background. Some of you will know if Joel was here, he would definitely know this. Joel finally had enough. There's a famous story about the oven of Achnai. The oven of Achnai is impure. It has to do with the way it's made. It really doesn't matter. The issue doesn't matter. All of the rabbis say it's impure, except for this one guy, Eliezer. Eliezer is a problem always. He always disagrees with everybody. You know the type? And he's always right. And this is the famous story you've heard. Eliezer says, if I am right and you are wrong, try to remember, let the river run backwards. And the river runs backwards. And the rabbis say, we don't decide halacha by rivers. He says, if I am right, let the trees move. Something like that. I think replant themselves. Yeah. And they do. And the rabbis say, we don't decide halacha by some stupid tree. He said, if I'm right, let this building cave in. And the walls start to come in. And the rabbis say, we don't decide halacha by walls either. It says, the Torah is in our hands. That's what it says in Deuteronomy, that God gave the Torah to us. We decide what the Torah says. And the story is very long. At one place that you can end the story, it says, God laughs, saying, my children have defeated me. The story keeps going. But it's about Rabbi Akiva and all sorts of other things in this very famous passage that every rabbi who's ever studied Talmud knows. Because everybody uses the story for their own purposes, usually opposite purposes, but everybody uses it. Anyway, what they're saying here is the point I just made. It doesn't matter that God was on Eliezer's side. God is saying Eliezer is right. Eliezer has the goal, the ends. Do what he says, he's right. And the rabbis say, no. What matters are the means, how we get to the decision. Right or wrong, who cares? All that matters is the means. We sit down as an academy, we debate it, we argue it, we come up with what we think the halakha is, but if it has the support of a majority, that is the halakha. Even if it's wrong, according to Rabbi Eliezer and God. Eliezer said that the oven is kosher, and the rabbi said, no, it's not kosher. And I don't care if there are miracles. It matters. All that matters is our process, because God gave it to us for our process. All that matters is our means. Okay, so let me jump to the end here. We could, if you want, you could read this thing, a couple of other more passages I've given you. I'm sure it will confuse you seriously. Yeah, it's sort of interesting in terms of Torah of human beings. It says them specifically, but you get the point. What Tal wanted us to understand, all that, and what he really hammered home, and which caused me to think really a lot, hopefully deeply about it, is that in Judaism, it's not the ends that matter. The means are the end. The means are the ends. The way we get to something is what matters. Being in the process is what matters. Devoting yourself to the means, doing it the best that you can. That's what matters, not the end results. None of us can control the end results. There's too many factors that we can't control. That's for God, who only sees, who only knows ends. But unless one of you is really God in disguise, none of us, who knows, maybe Cheryl, who knows, none of us,
She knows.
none of us are God. And so none of us has control of the ends. I think I'm overstating it because we do have to know what we're shooting for, what the means are for. As I said last week, the utopian ideas are relevant if they help us understand what our goal is, what we're moving for. But they're only relevant if we're dedicated to moving towards them, to the mean. This congregation is relevant if it's dedicated to them being the best it can be, the means of being the best congregation, not some specific goal. They're going to change all the time. The circumstances are going to change. The makeup of the congregation is going to change. But the means of, we have to do everything we can to try to get there, to be the best Jews we can be, to be the best example of Judaism we can be. Does that make sense to people? I don't know if I'm communicating this or not, or if I've just shouted you into that. But I think that that's what he was trying to say. And he thought, I think, with him, this is relevant, particularly if you're talking about what's going on with Israel today, or what's going on in the American Jewish community. The means do matter. And you can't be what the government is saying. This is my clearly identified harangue against the current government of the state of Israel. Clearly labeled, who only wants to talk about it, right? All that matters is, what's the term they use? Nitzachon hechlet. Muchlat. Absolute victory. That's all that matters. Don't ask me how we're going to get there. They refuse to talk about how we're going to get there. And how we're getting there is going a long way to destroying the Jewish people. Is doing what? Going a long way to destroying the Jewish people. If you care about the worldwide Jewish people. I think it's certainly even within Israel. But this notion that all that matters is the absolute defeat of our enemies, even if it destroys Jewish standing in the world, that just doesn't stand. Doesn't have feet. And again, I come down in the same place every time. It's incumbent upon us to help people understand that you can be pro-Israel and anti this government, like most Israelis. We've looked at it now in a lot of different ways, in terms of the questions of peace, and in terms of last week when we were, when we were talking about what kind of means, which hands, what dirt do you want on your hands, and now this time in terms of just the importance of means itself, that's really the whole question. Okay, so we don't meet next week. In 2 weeks, when we're here, in 2 weeks, we will look at some other ideas about morality and Jewish morality in this time, and we'll specifically look at some things that have to do with the Israel Defense Forces and their codes, what soldiers and officers are taught. Yeah.
Some time ago, you talked about funny things you observed from the Bema. One was the man with the hearing aids. Another, you said there was a man that came to services in a wheelchair with a puppet. Yes. It was time for the congregation to rise. He would raise the puppet. And that cracked you up. It's remarkable
what people remember. How long ago did I say that? We always remember that.
Good story.
He came with a puppet that he made. He first came with a fish. This is the truth. A plastic fish on a backboard. You saw, if any of you
I
stay
can
up late
swear
at,
this happened.
if
I
you
swear.
if you stay up late at night, you used to see these things. It was a fish that if you touched something or if it was a motion detector, the fish turned and started to sing, "Don't worry, be happy."
Yeah.
Okay, so he said he couldn't sing, and he asked me, this is his fault, he started it. He asked me, could he bring something to help him participate in the music? I'm like, kind of an idiot, wanting, I guess I'll put it in this language, wanting him to be seen, I said, sure. Okay, so the next week he comes with a paper bag. Unfortunately, before services started, he showed it to me. At which point I had to gently explain to him that he was not allowed to use this fish during services, that it would be distraction. But afterwards at the Kiddush, I'd ask everybody to take a look at what he brought to show everybody, which is what happened. Believe it or not, at a Kiddush, people drinking wine and eating bagels and watching this singing. All right, so he said to me at the end, okay, I understand you don't want anything to be disturbing. Can I bring something else next week? Now, you would think I would have learned my lesson. And you would think wrong. So I said, you're sure if it won't make any noise? He said, absolutely. So I said, okay. So the next week, he comes with a paper bag. And I said to him, there's not a fish in there. There is no fish. Where you heard this is I told this story at the bar when I was doing comedy that night. All right, anyway, if you guys were there. Anyway, and he said, no, it's not. It won't make any noise. So he's sitting in the back. He was morbidly obese, sadly, and he was in an oversized wheelchair. And the only place he could be was in the doorway. So he's sitting in the doorway. He puts his hand in the bag. And when I asked everybody to rise, out of his bag comes his puppet. It's a styrofoam ball that he's made like a little dress for that his hand is in. And if you remember Kukla, it only has 2 dots for an eye and a dot for a nose. It doesn't even have a mouth. It is not going to make any noise. And so we rise for the Baruch Hu and we're singing la 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 la, and he goes la 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 la. At which point nobody can see him but the cantor and me, and we're doing the side eye kind of thing. And then we get to the Baruch Hu, and the puppet starts to bow. Through the entire service, the puppet stood for the tefillah, the puppet stood for Aleinu.
For the Torah.
And we took the Torah out of the ark, danced the whole time, bowing. Poor little kukla with no mouth. Anyway, but yeah, and by the way, that actually happened exactly the way I just described it. The thing with the guy with the hearing aids happened exactly the way I just described it.
Thank you.
I have
It's
a-
good to end with a smile.
Yeah, I have other stories. All right, so in 2 weeks, we will take a look at Micha Goodman.